Before we start talk, I'd like to make a couple of comments about your presentation. I'd like to just make the point clear that discrimination is a big issue for the locals, but also discrimination is big toward the self-voluntary evacuees. In both ways it goes. That's what I want to say, one thing. People who try to move away from Fukushima or like a irradiated zone. So that's the point I'd like to make clear. And also the number issue is very important. It's very obscure, you know, it's very unknownness. But finally, the question is which way it goes. You know, both apocalypse or obscure things can go either way. Whether we say everything is okay, you know, let's just keep on going the way it is, or we try to change something. That's the two things I want to say. Yeah. And also, like, I want to say, like, I myself saw a lot of films made after Fukushima, and they are very good. It's a very serious, many films made about, like, informing what's exactly happening. You know, I saw quite a few in New York, and we did a lot of screenings in New York for the informative sessions and stuff. But I'm beginning to think that is great. That is great. I'm not saying they are not good or anything. They should keep on going. But also, you know, I wanted to see something that questions the representation of Fukushima and representation about information itself. So I was very happy to see your film for the first time. It's, you know, like it seems to me, try to talk about what's happening in Japan in various aspects. And even like including this like apparatus, physical apparatus, visualization of physical apparatus of nuclear. And also like I liked very much that you show the beautiful green that I sort of related to my article that fungus hiding in the green. And I wanna, you know, maybe I should ask you a very general question, but what made you going there and make this film? And you know, also another question is your idea of like representing something like that by that kind of language, or like assemblage, or how can I say, sometimes quotation, sometimes, you know, yeah. Maybe a question, maybe very general. But,
I mean, I think, well, we were very actually obviously shocked when the event happened on March the 11th. All that 2 years ago, because for us it was a question of how can Japan have 54 nuclear power plants after having had such a terrible experience of being bombed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so the question for us was what got Japan to this state and why? And then as we began to research this and actually meeting you at 16 Beaver and reading your texts was a great learning process for us, because it made us realize that we are all part of it. We are all affected by it. So the idea of the here and elsewhere and the kind of logic of why do we go to Japan and make a film about this as outsiders is collapsed. The idea of the outsider in this situation is a kind of was for us. The film was about kind of our own kind of research in a way into how this affects all of us politically, yeah. I mean that's kind of quite general, but maybe Kojo wants to say something.
I mean. Your notion of the global nuclear regime really helped us. It helped us to give a vocabulary to the frustration that we felt, but also the implication. So you sit in London and you watch the news, and it comes and it goes, and the news narrates the crisis in terms of the the struggle of the brave Japanese people to overcome this terrible disaster. And this narration is correct, but it doesn't seem to go far enough. And the more the British press fixated on this narrative of heroic struggle against terrible odds, the more frustrated we became. And eventually we needed to find a vocabulary for this kind of frustration. And it's true that more information and more facts and more numbers didn't satisfy this frustration. It actually added to it. And we had a yearning for a kind of vocabulary that was as abstract as the horror itself. You know, we wanted images that were as abstract as the horror that was being faced. It became clear to us that Fukushima is something quite different than Chernobyl, and it's different from Hiroshima, and it's different from Nagasaki. In a paradoxical way, and this is something we return to, in a paradoxical way, the destruction and the ruination of Hiroshima and Nagasaki gives one a kind of a visible quantity. In a certain sense, we're comfortable with ruins ever since the kind of the rise and fall of Rome, of the Roman Empire. You know, the destruction of the Roman Empire as this visual iconography of ruin. But as you saw from Minato's image that Miya showed you, when you go to Fukushima, you don't see ruination. What you see is on the contrary, this world which is something like Rilke's Duino elegy, where the beauty and the terror are combined, and you can't separate one from the other. You see a world that's closer to Tarkovsky's Stalker, Zona, you know, the moment where the philosopher and the novelist and the stalker, they're on their rail car, and Tarkovsky is close in on their faces, and they're traveling in the rail car, and the image, it starts out sepia, and Tarkovsky holds tight on their faces, and the rail car travels and goes on and on and on and on, and then at some point it switches to color, and the rail car stops and they're in the zone. And remember, the zone is extremely lush. Remember this scene, it's just lush, and the stalker gets off the rail car and throws himself backwards into the grass, and he's in the zone. And so this mixture of beauty, terror, and somehow banality as well, the everyday nature of Fukushima, this meant that there was, you know, this abstract horror. It's not simply that radiation is invisible, it's that it's abstracted, it hides. So when Kurosawa, for example, in his final film Dreams, Kurosawa tries to depict, Kurosawa's final film is Dreams, it's 9 dreams, and one of the dreams is about a radiation, it's about a meltdown, and so there are all these people on the beach, and they've been driven to the beach by this disaster, and Kurosawa colors the radiation so that people can identify it. So, you know, a red gas travels across, and one character says that's cesium, then there's orange, and another character says that's strontium. And so you can see that Kurosawa, one of the greatest directors of the post-war era, was forced to come up with these kinds of solutions. So part of us was attracted to these kinds of problems, because we sensed that if you're making a documentary, then your main emphasis is on access to people that can give you the facts on the ground. If you're making social media, then your point is to be as fast as possible. And so the role that art can play is to precisely analyze what role images play in constructing the understanding that we have. And this means we had to clear out a lot of other things in order to make space for this reflection on the role of analysis and on the role of invisibility, which also meant this analysis of the limits of the camera, the impotence of documentary, and the productive impotence, because the productive impotence of documentary doesn't mean you give up on camera, it doesn't mean you give up on filming, it means you integrate this into your work. And so And so for us, these formal questions had political implications. And so we decided that, that this is what our artistic intervention could do. And as Anjali says, we gave ourselves permission to go as outsiders because in Britain is just as implicated in the global nuclear regime as any other country. TEPCO, the monopoly that runs the Fukushima power plants, has a branch in London and a branch in America, as well as in Japan. So the geography of the nuclear regime implicates us as well. So, so we decided to authorize ourselves to go.
I think one of the things, maybe I could ask you, I mean, one of the things that I was confronted by in Japan was this sense of a kind of patriotism. I couldn't figure out whether it was a kind of patriotism or a political apathy. You know, when we're talking about the stigma related to the people who from Fukushima and the whole politics around food and how, you know, the shops in Tokyo, you know, they're encouraging the elderly to buy food and the elderly are willingly buying it in order to support Fukushima. And then this whole kind of machismo, you know, even when we were there with the people who were helping us shoot the film producing, they were very like, oh, you know, the people in Fukushima have to eat this, so you shouldn't be so scared about eating this or that, you know. There's these kinds of ridiculous kinds of normalizations in a way of the whole situation. So I was, you know, constantly, you know, thinking about this idea of patriotism or political apathy and how, you know, and then you kind of course begin to think about Japan in relation to the animation and the kind of the animation of the infantilized, and it's kind of related to this infantilization where everything becomes cute and soft and friendly and you know, touchable and tactile, and you know, there's this sense that the kind of sensory, the sensations that one would normally apply to a kind of greater sort of political, more kind of thoughtful response to what's going on, is kind of ameliorated by this kind of tactile, animated, infantilized zone that people inhabit. So I'm just trying to, I was just curious as to what you think.
Yeah, like I basically live in New York, but I've been sort of communicating with the Japanese social movements of sort of anti-authoritarian vein for many years. So I go there a lot and I'm in constant communication with a lot of them. But so I cannot represent, you know, whole Japan, but some of my ideas is that, first of all, global nuclear regime in terms of Japan is like a very much closely associated with the influence of the United States after the war, you know. I mean, Korea and Japan, you know, very close, both, you know, like US bases everywhere, and post-war Japanese regime is very much, you know, sort of built by the United States. It may not be too much to say that. You know, first of all, MacArthur sort of was largely responsible to secure the place of the emperor. If it were like, you know, if it were not for him, he could have been executed by a revolutionary force that was growing at that time. So a lot of things sort of like manipulated by the US. And also, you know, like in the 50s, there were 40s and 50s, there are a lot of social sort of instability. But beginning from the, first of all, 1957, there was this like five Dragon incident, which was like a US did nuclear weapon test in the Pacific Ocean that affected Japanese fishing boats. And that, that was just like after like a very short time, only several years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And people was really enraged. And there's a huge surge of anti-nuke movement in the 57, was it? Maybe you know more than I do, 57, right? So that was a huge movement, and a lot, many women involved, not just macho, you know, lefty guys, you know, but a lot of women are involved. And this impetus was very, very important to prepare the famous 1960s anti-US-Japan Security Treaty uprising, you know. And all these things scared Japan and the ruling class, ruling power of Japan and US. And a lot of like information manipulation start afterward. Like, you know, like a famous talk by Eisenhower, like nukes for peace. You know, trigger this and try to sort of divide anti-nuke movement in Japan between sort of like, you know, anti-nuclear weaponry movement and saying, okay, like peaceful use for the civilian use was okay. And that kind of manipulation and a lot of media and event commercialization and also, unfortunately or fortunately, I cannot decide, but you know, economic growth began to happen around the 60s, you know. And that also like made Japan into a commercial, very much commercial, commodity, culture-oriented society with this like a patriarchy, traditional patriarchy attached to it somehow. And as you mentioned, the machismo in Japan still exists. And today, like especially after Fukushima, I heard this story. In the household, there's a big sort of like a division. Like the husband tend to say, oh, everything is okay, let's, you know, everything is fine, and I have to go to work, so, you know, and wives, who, or especially mothers of young children, they really, really are serious. And they are the, many people say that they are the main force today of anti-nuke movement in Japan. Anti-nuke movement doesn't mean just protesting, but some already mentioned, but a lot of radiation measurement movement, like you know, measuring the playground in the local communities. And she showed you know, graphs before, but the radiation movement is very, very unpredictable. You know, like it's not like what you call like a square diameter expansion. So-called hotspot create hotspots in different, you know, spots, and it also moves around. And also what we are dealing with, the so-called nano activity, it's not like, you know, the something like a poisonous object. If you put into ocean, it's thin it down. It's nano objects, nano activities exist different dimensions. Like there's a logic, for instance, like a certain amount of cesium was discovered in a school lunch. And but this amount is, if you divide it into 50 kids, it's going to be okay. But this logic of thin it down, if it's chopped, you know, like a mushroom into like a 50 pieces, it doesn't work, because, you know, the nano object, nano activity exists in certain tiny part of one mushroom. So more like, you know, like certain kids get tremendous amount of radioactivity, and other kids don't get anything. So this is the logic I want to point out with the eating of that soup too. Who knows? This is unknown. We are facing the unknown thing, and then that's why it's representation, information, strange psychological war, and we have to prepare for that.
And it's also important to say that children, because their thyroids are still developing, it's much more, it affects them much more if they're eating contaminated food in any way whatsoever. Yeah.
So how was, I want to know like a more practicality of your, when you are in Japan, like how did you feel, who you met, how long did it take, was it hard? Or what that kind of more like a, you know, practical, your experience, you know.
It was extremely difficult shoot. Usually we work with the same people. We work with the same cameraman for a number of years now. And we couldn't work with this cameraman for a number of reasons. So we worked with a new cameraman, and we worked with two producers, one American, one Japanese, and so they were helping us and supporting us. I think we used, we researched as much as we could when we got there, and we had you know, a list of people we wanted to meet, locations we wanted to go to, but we tried, as it were, we tried to learn from every shoot we did. So we tried to turn the shoot into a learning experience, almost literally, which meant just, you know, admitting to how little you know, and understanding yourself as an amateur. You know, we're not physicists, but we're not scholars of Japanese history, nor of Japanese culture. So we are really, in a certain sense, at the limits of our ignorance, and we had to be really quite humble and quite clear about what we didn't know, and not try to pretend to any more knowledge that we had, and to integrate that limit into the work. And so this openness, whereby everybody we met would suggest more material to us, would point us to more leads, and we would then like make a decision on whether to follow up or not. So, for example, in a couple of times in the film, I don't know how many people were here this morning, but if you did manage to see it, there's 2 or 3 times where there is this performance which just appears in the film with no explanation, and it's this performer called Atsuhiro Ito, who records under the name Optron, and he's part of the Japanese noise music scene, and he's worked out a way of taking an ordinary neon tube and connecting it to a guitar pedal and making noise from it. So he has this neon light, and he makes this excruciating noise, extremely, I mean, real noise terror, and you know, people pointed us towards him, and we met him and talked to him, and he had a real analysis of what he was doing. His argument was that, you know, after Fukushima, there was a kind of national campaign in which people were asked to conserve electricity and to conserve light, and this campaign had a moral dimension to it and a patriotic dimension. So, for the good of the nation, people had to save electricity and save light, and he objected to this moralizing and psychologizing of this situation. And so when you see him moving this light around and making this extreme noise, this is his form of protest music. But it's not protest music in the Bob Dylan sense. It's not protest music in, you know, a Public Enemy sense. It's protest music against the morality, the moral economy of light, and using noise as protest. And so in the film, he appears, using electricity as a form of protest, and using electricity as it shows up as light, as illumination. And so he appears in the film and he disappears throughout the film. And that's also because we realized how much, and you pointed out this, and we didn't realize how much, it's naive, but we didn't understand how much Fukushima and Tokyo were twinned, that Tokyo is the twin, Tokyo is the dark, evil twin of Fukushima, the dependency that you talked about, the way in which Fukushima and Tokyo are coupled together, such that, and this is why the question of light, electricity and power is crucial to the whole film. It's why we shoot in infrared many times, because when you shoot in infrared at night, then light jumps, it pops out, and it takes on a presence and a drama. And because in a certain sense we thought of light as an agent, as an entity in an assemblage that we wanted to point to and then implicate ourselves, because of course when we show up with our cameras, we're plugging into that same power source. So we kind of wanted to implicate ourselves. We filmed ourselves plugging everything in, just to like drive home the point. But in the end, we didn't use those shots. It didn't seem we had to be that illustrative about what we were doing. But these kinds of questions, they became really clear to us once we were there. So we had to let ourselves be led a lot by the people we met, and we had to trust that they clearly knew more than we did, because they were inhabiting the context. So we listened all the time. We said as little as we could and listened as much as possible. and then made decisions based on who said what and how they said it and what they said.
Yeah, I mean, we conducted a lot of interviews. I mean, of course, there was so much that people were telling us, and we conducted some long interviews and filmed them. But in the editing process, we decided to kind of reduce it to, you know, these three main characters. This is Chihiro Minato talking about the invisible landscape and the divinity and the kind of whether radiation will be absorbed and normalized as a kind of divinity within the culture of the future, the religion or the spiritual landscape of the future. And then the farmer, you know, who's this old 75-year-old farmer living in Itatemura, who used to be a businessman, and then he decided to retire in Itatemura and grow pure rice and live and invite all his friends, and they could all eat some of the best rice that he had produced, organic rice. And then when the plume went over Itatemura and it rained, it actually, his farm was completely contaminated. So, you know, you're getting 150 microsieverts an hour just under the drains, and it's a very highly contaminated area. But he has willingly decided to stay there, you know, and he's a willing guinea pig, you know. And it's just very, we found that very interesting in comparison to what Mei Shigenobu was saying about how Japan is being, you know, turned into a kind of guinea pig, is going to become a guinea pig for effects of nuclear radiation.
By the way, those who maybe, do you know Shigenobu? Do you know any of you who she is? Or?
Mei Shigenobu.
Mei Shigenobu? Okay. You know, okay. So generally, just so that you know, she's a, I mean, daughter of a very known person who's one of the leaders of Japan Red Army, who went to Palestine in solidarity in the 70s.
Fusako Shigenobu.
Fusako Shigenobu, yeah. But she herself is a journalist now, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, she's a journalist and, you know, a really incredibly knowledgeable about the catastrophe and the nuclear power regime and the media, you know, because TEPCO also owns the media, a lot of the media in Japan.
Yes,
yeah.
that's one of the power that electric company has in Japan. It's media. That's why media campaign go along. A lot of media campaigns go along with the government information tactic, you know,
to normalize the radiation. But again, in the film, we didn't want to start going into who Mei Shigenobu is. I mean, that would have been too much, just to bring the Japanese Red Army into it. I mean, that would have been like a 3-hour.
But good taste. Good
yes,
taste.
Yeah, yes.
I mean, the Japanese Red Army, the Japanese Red Army, they're clearly the equivalent of, they were kind of parallel to the Red Army faction in Germany and the Red Brigade in Italy, Rosso Brigate. So these were some of the most important revolutionary groups of the era. So Fusako Shigenobu is an important figure who was underground for many years. And so Mei Shigenobu has an important status, both as somebody who inherits this legacy, but somebody who's carved out her own life as a respected journalist and who works between the Arab world and the Japanese world, and who is equally at home reporting on the conflict in Palestine, as she is reporting about Japan. What's interesting in this moment is that you'll notice when she starts speaking, she says, some people have said that, and then she goes into this interpretation of the government's policy of moving rubble around. So she's not claiming that she believes it. She's saying this is how people understand this process which is going on all around them, and we have to take this popular understanding seriously, because we're in a state in which people have gained a suspicion, an automatic suspicion of what the government's saying, and people are right to be suspicious. And in these conditions, popular reinterpretations circulate all the time. And the more the government tries to reassure people, the more anxious people become. And certainly what we found in our brief time there, we were only shooting for about 20 days. What we found was that there was almost two, within Tokyo, there was almost two worlds. There was a world of people who through different processes of normalization, were attempting to reconstruct their lives and to carry on as normal, and working to kind of somehow minimize and play down the psychic anguish of being kind of continually trying to block out this kind of ongoing quotidian horror. And then on the other hand, there were people who lived more online, people who are more into what people call citizenship science, people who are doing their own testing, people who are building their own Geiger counters. And these people were online, and they were almost searching for the bad news that could confirm how truly bad things were. In other words, the worse the news, the more it clarified the conditions that they were facing. And these felt like two types of citizens.
Yes, I'd like to add one more thing. That's true, but also their success would be because of their sort of like a almost hysteric warning. They know that they sort of like their direction is to try to prove something is dangerous, but most of them are doing for free, right? They are not necessarily wealthy, right? So they are almost, to my understanding, sacrifice. If they are proven in the future to be useless, that's their goal. That's what I heard from some of them. But tactically, they have to make hysteria, because hysteria is another language that Japanese like male machoist government officials call housewives who are like claiming like danger every day. They call them like mass women hysteria, but they sort of affirm the term hysteria. They will be hysteric more as their role.
I think this is very important what you're saying, and what Angelica also hints, I feel, is in fact that anything that would come from these subjects who make a point of this individual's life value, they are either infantilized, the attitude is either infantilized or hystericized, or even worse than that, suddenly adopted to become a moral of government and then to lose all efficiency. Because if we talk about the moral, it's morally like this or like that, then we really stab it in the middle. Because some of those attitudes can only work between people. So first stage is the paranoia from the institution, and the next thing will be that people will be paranoid from one another if we don't deconstruct this mechanism and see that this is all the time, infantilized and marginalized or appropriated for the service of institutions.
Thank you for your comment.
Yeah, are there any more thoughts or responses or questions, either to Sabu or to Angelica or myself, about anything you've seen?
Well, I just wanted to say one thing. I think the hysteric and the infantile are kind of two different poles, and they're not. For me, it's important, right? That distinction, because in a way, I think the disturbance of eating this kind of radish and all of that, and the laughter that it produced also among everybody, and when people were trying to sort of raise some concerns, whether it was Irene or Sabu, was sort of seen as hysteric. And then I think the other pole is, to me, infantile, which is this reaction of like, kind of not taking it seriously, as if everything is just like a play, but in the worst way, not, you know, a kind of frivolity that takes place in confrontation to this kind of horror, but a frivolity that actually just chooses to be ignorant, you know. And I think it's a major, for me, it's like it's really important to say it, because there is something really disturbing about this thing, because it is very connected to a kind of nationalist and patriarchal kind of ideology and order, really, that's happening in Japan, which is like saying, eat this food, you know, and be part of the kind of patriotic national kind of reconstruction.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm finding it hard to put into words because I don't want to generalize about Japan and culture and Japanese design and animation and, you know, the visitor centers in the nuclear power state plants where there's atom boy or nuclear boy and, you know, all of this. But I think the performance earlier kind of is, and the way that the film that we were being shown wasn't subtitled, it's just this kind of, somehow this sense of a kind of playful, cute, joyful, somehow action that, you know, makes this lovely soup. Everyone is eating it, but hidden within it is like this deadly substance. You know, I mean, that's Japan, right?
I don't know. I don't know Japan, actually. I know only certain aspect of Japan. I know only certain aspect of Japan.
Well, the time is up.
Yeah.
But I wonder whether any of you like to respond about your performance or the laughter that we shared, considered to be a fun time.
Please respond to that.
Yeah. Well, it feels quite uncomfortable to have this here. It smells all over, and we all know where it's from. I was myself thinking about if I want to have kids, and what will happen if I eat this. Like, is it harmful or not? Well, I don't know. Now I tried it anyway, but so if it's playful, that yes, it's playful, but it's this whole day is all serious.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't give people contaminated food to make a point. You know, it's not a joke. So if people are negotiating a relationship to contamination and the stigma of discrimination of people who, from Fukushima, this is all highly sensitive stuff. To kind of perform it in a Dutch art school, whatever, I think is frivolous.
I'm not judging his piece at all. I'm just pointing out, I mean, this like eating or not is part of the everyday politics in Japan in a very serious way. That's what I was just saying. Yeah. I don't even understand, you know, like so much of his work. So I'm not entitled to judge. And this is artwork, right? So it almost exists in a different domain from what I'm doing. And I don't necessarily want to judge it, but I have to point out, this is a kind of politics that's happening there in a very seriously radical way. And I want you to be aware of it, but I'm not judging his piece.
I'm also not promoting, like, you know, eating, that you can like choose eat or not. And I think, I don't know, I try to want to avoid sort of prioritize voice of 当事者って何て言うんですか？当事者って何て言うんですか？
The people who actually live and suffer there, living there, living their lives and suffering there. I mean, that's what you want to say, right?
Yeah, but I shouldn't like rely on too much about that as well. Like I try to, how do you say? Well, I wasn't really to explaining everything, but next section of performance was a little bit of this. Maybe you might read as a patronization of audience here, because we are dancing some dance that is originally created by state. The Iwaki city created 1981, and we are kind of appropriating this city created dance. That city tried to give you a false communal identity, and this dance we practiced last 2 days with students. So student will dance. I mean, it's not really an answer what you asked, but
say one thing. I think one of the points of food is to switch the terms of discourse and response, to switch it from a discursive response to what you might call a gut reaction. A corporeal reaction, to switch it to a question of incorporation and risk, so that I think the playfulness is not in the work itself, it's in how people try to diffuse the act, which is actually both a gift and a poison. It's a pharmacological experiment in incorporation and digestion. And I think the laughter, which strikes me as kind of slightly, you know, have a kind of a panic-tinged laughter, I think indicates that the work hits its target. So it either tries to avoid the head or tries to collapse the stomach and the brain together, so that you can't immediately go for a discursive response, or rather discourse has to travel through the stomach. And so when you do that, then you get corporeal responses, you get uneasy laughter, but you also get some anger, and I think that's quite important.